Okay, I promised you a video on overuse of similes, and I'm getting it done tonight, even though I have no clue how I'm going to get everything else done tonight that I need to do too. I'm going to attempt to be a little bit more organized in this video, but we'll see if that actually happens. First off, I did want to start with the fact that I'm really going to do this more from what causes me to overuse similes, because there are plenty of other videos out there that other people have done that are really good about why you might overuse similes, and I don't want to just go off of what they're saying and just use their stuff. So I'm really going to go off of my personal experience and what I find works for me to help avoid the overuse of similes, or using bad similes even in areas where maybe a simile would be perfectly fine, but the simile that you use is corny or just crap. So first things first, one of the main factors that I've noticed causes me to overuse similes is when I run into a situation where I want to describe something, but I'm lacking in the vocabulary to actually just describe it. So I end up just comparing it to something else. I'll say, it's like this thing, or it's as blue as the whatever the fuck it is, and stuff. And it really just comes down to that I couldn't think of better words to actually just describe it. And I end up resorting to just comparing it to something else that I had in mind that's similar, which is problematic for a couple of reasons, because a lot of times then I end up comparing it to something that's so similar to it that the simile doesn't really add any extra meaning to it, which is something we'll talk about more in a little bit. But the other reason that I find that I tend to overuse similes, and this is the really sad and embarrassing one, is I'll think of some lousy simile and then I'll be like, oh great, that'll add words to my thing. Oh, I don't even want to admit that because that's so bad that I'm just shamelessly using crappy similes to get my word count up. It's so bad, guys. That is my writer's confession for the day. Anyway, those are my two main reasons that tend to cause me to overuse similes. One of which is really just me cheating on my word count, essentially. And the other of which is really just kind of it would be easily handled if I just go to Google and actually maybe try to look up some better words that I could use to describe things, instead of resorting to using similes that are not useful. The next thing I wanted to talk about are a couple of tips that may help you if you find yourself overusing similes, or you find that you're maybe not even overusing them, but the similes you are using don't really work. If you want another video on this, Ellen Brock, she is a freelance novel editor, has a really good video on this subject as well. And if you're watching any WriterTube series, you should definitely be subscribed to her because she's awesome and she has fantastic advice and opinions on things, especially since it is from a person who does editing, I'm assuming for a living or a side hustle, whatever she does it for, whether it's for full-time or part-time. Getting writing advice from an editor, I think is very valuable, so I definitely suggest her videos. But I have a couple of pieces of advice of my own, which may kind of overlap with some of the stuff that she talks about as well, but I want to try to kind of put some of my own stuff in there as well as to what might cause, well, maybe not what might cause, but really what might be the problem with some of your similes. So we're going to go over that next. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and if you apply these to the similes that you're finding in your own writing, I think that you'll find that a lot of them are either just not necessary altogether, or they just don't fit. And if you really need to have a simile there, you can probably come up with one that fits better. I have an example at the end of this of a very bad simile I almost wrote like literally 10 minutes ago, and I caught myself and I was just like, oh, it's just so bad. But we'll go over that in a minute and you can laugh at me. But like I mentioned, one of my main problems when I find myself overusing similes in my writing is it's a lack of vocabulary or a lack of thinking of a better way that I can just describe the thing without using a comparison to something else. And the question you might want to ask yourself about your similes that would help weed out those kind of situations is, do I actually need a simile to describe this thing? Is this thing so unfamiliar to people, or something that's so hard for my audience to imagine that I need to compare it to something that they might be more familiar with so that they can actually understand it or visualize it or get the concept that I'm trying to get across? That's really the point of similes in the first place. If it's something that most people would understand what it's like, then there's really no need for a simile. There's not really a need to add extra explanation. You're just getting added words, which is bringing me back to my other naughty habit with similes. Blah, I can't talk. So that's the first question you might want to ask yourself is, do I even need to use a comparison of any kind to something else, or do people just understand it? The second thing that you would probably want to ask yourself, and this is something that I have a bad habit of doing because I am what I would refer to as a dabbler. I dabble in a lot of different topics. Like I love to learn like everything about everything, like just the randomest subjects. And as a side effect of that, I get a lot of references that I don't think other people might get. So I sometimes have this bad habit of using those references in similes where, I can't even think of something on the fly, but it'll be something real obscure. I'll be like, this was as so-and-so as this obscure thing that like almost nobody's going to get. So you might want to ask yourself when you're using a simile, is this actually going to mean anything to anybody? Or am I just making this description more complicated than it needs to be by throwing in information that people might be like, okay, it's as blank, but what the hell is that other thing? That didn't help me at all. So if you find yourself doing that, or you're making a complicated or obscure reference with your similes, it might not be helpful. You might be better off just like foregoing that simile, or if you have to have a simile there, figure out a better way to do it than using some obscure reference that nobody's actually going to understand. The third question you might want to ask yourself has to do with the terrible simile example I tried to make about 10 minutes ago. And it's does the simile that I'm trying to use even match the tone of the scene that I'm writing? And this is one that a lot of other people talk about as far as whether or not you should want to use similes, but I just wanted to throw it in there simply because I had one that was so bad a couple of minutes ago because I couldn't think of a better way of describing the sound that this thing was making, that I was like, no, that doesn't match the tone, and I caught myself. But the other question you might want to ask yourself about your similes, to find out if they are actually necessary and if they actually fit and if they're working, is, does this simile match the tone? To give you a terrible example, one that you would definitely want to avoid, I've got this very tense scene where this person is sneaking through the undergrowth of a jungle trying to quietly get somewhere in the middle of the night to avoid being ambushed by a bunch of spear-wielding islanders who would probably kill him on sight. And he's sneaking through, and it says, it was something to the effect of, he basically abandoned his attempts to sneak quietly since every footstep through the dried leaves sounded like he was crinkling a Lay's potato chip wrapper or something. It was so bad. It just didn't fit the tone at all. It was terrible, but I was proud of myself because I caught it. But I didn't catch it good enough to avoid putting a simile. I ended up comparing it to like walking on shards of glass or something like that, which was at least a little bit more in the tone, but I think I should really cut it because it's just crap. Everybody knows what rustling leaves sound like. It doesn't need added stuff. It was just bad. All right. The self-shaming is over. that was an example of a terrible, terrible simile as far as keeping tone, plus not actually needing to use a simile because people know what dried, rustling leaves sound like. Anybody who's lived anywhere where there's fall has gone out at fall and purposely gone and jumped on leaves and like made that crinkling sound. They know what it sounds like. Anyway, there was my terrible simile example. Hopefully that will help you weed out some of your unnecessary similes, or maybe recognize when a better simile should be substituted there that would actually fit the situation. That's it for me for tonight. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that was helpful. You have a great one. All right, bye.